thinking the other day, if you look about this in kind of an old school way, think of the N's and the NBCs and the CBSs of the world, the big names in
I always change it. Thanks for reminding me. You're
Do you remember those kaleidoscopes when we were kids that you would turn and they had these glass beads at the end and you put them up to the light and you could get all these different kinds of shapes and colors and everything like that? How about a kaleidoscope of bygone places, events, and items that were once identified with the gateway city, St. Louis? That's what we're going to talk about. Well, greetings, listeners in Listenerland. Welcome to St. Louis in Tune, and thank you for joining us for fresh perspectives on issues and events with experts, community leaders, and everyday people who are driving change and making an impact that shapes our society and world. I'm Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston. Mark, how you doing?
Well, great. We're back together.
We are back together finally.
I know. We've had a couple of challenges. I don't want to, but we're together.
It's
scheduling,
with the holidays, sickness, medical situations in my mouth.
Teeth, I know.
Right. Yeah,
I know.
Teeth.
And anything to do with the face, teeth, eyes, I'm just, it scares me. I hate it. It hurts.
Especially as we are getting more seasoned.
Thank you.
Well, our return to civility, folks, this is something to take into consideration to help our society be more civil. Cover your mouth or excuse yourself whenever you have to yawn during a conversation. Even if a yawn really results from a lack of oxygen, people still assume it means you're bored. So cover your mouth or excuse yourself whenever you have to yawn during a conversation.
Amen.
And
I just say amen. That's like one of my little pet peeves. Another one would be eating food with your mouth open, chewing with your mouth open. Yeah. Don't do that.
Smacking the gum.
And there's a word for it that people have that for me that I can't take it. I can't stand it.
Chewing with your mouth open?
Yeah. Well, listening to people like that, there's a word. I don't even know what it is, but it's
rude.
Yeah, it is rude. I don't want to see. It's seafood.
Oh, seafood. Yes, that's right. That's right. I remember that.
I know. It's one of my afflictions. One of my many afflictions.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I know.
Well, you're not going to be bored today, folks. You won't need to be yawning because we have a great conversation planned. Dennis Dillon is a retired sports writer and editor who's worked 12 years at the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. It was a great paper back in the day. And 26 years at the Sporting News, another great paper back in the day. Two of his stories received honorable mention in the Best American Sports Writing Anthology. He's also written for SportsIllustrated.com and ESPN. In 2011, he received the Bob Bragg Award presented by the National Football Foundation and College Football Hall of Fame, the St. Louis chapter, for entertainment, integrity, and professional devotion to the game of football. Native of Kansas City, Missouri, and he's a longtime St. Louisan. He's one of the authors of The Lost Treasures of St. Louis. Dennis, welcome to St. Louis in Tune.
Thank you, Arnold. Mark, good to be with you guys.
Yeah.
So I guess first I want to go to two of your stories received honorable mention in the Best American Sports Writing Anthology. What were those stories about?
Well, the one that I was most happy with was, I don't know if you guys remember a former football player for the Detroit Lions named Reggie Brown. Not a Pro Bowler, not a future Hall of Fame or anything. In 1997, I believe, the Lions were playing a game on a Sunday against the Jets, and I was working that day at the Sporting News, but we had the game on TV. And he made a tackle and led with his head and got knocked unconscious, and he lay there on the field, and that was one of those things where the broadcast say, okay, we're going to show you this, and we're going to cut away. They must have done that 3 or 4 times, because they couldn't move him at first. They were afraid that, they might, so they tried to immobilize him. So anyway, I was watching that, and I found it interesting, all the things that were going on around him. And so I ended up doing a story on him. It was the 17 minutes that saved Reggie Brown's life. And I interviewed players, trainers, doctors, Reggie Brown himself, about what they remembered, what was going on at that time. One of his teammates, and it showed on TV, he ran back into the locker room, came running back out and put something in Reggie's hand. And it was a prayer card that his mom gave this other player that he kept in his locker. But he wanted to give it to Reggie Brown, to help him the spiritual get better and all that. So it proved to be an interesting story. I thought it was just all the things that were going on, the people that saved him, and it was a surreal scene. And some guys never get up. They are paralyzed. Well, and then he ended up wearing this huge thing on his neck and his head, that a round circle. It was a brace that kept his neck and head in place for a few weeks. And that was one of the ones that I enjoy doing.
Wow. So sports writing, rather than being I guess you work for the Globe, were you doing sports at the Globe?
Yes. I started out doing high school sports.
Okay.
And then I ended up covering the football Cardinals from 1978 till 85.
Okay.
And that was fun.
Yeah.
They weren't very good during that time, but
Nope.
it was a fun beat to have, so.
And I guess you have this affinity then for football rather than maybe baseball or soccer or hockey, or because you kind of covered the Cardinals back then?
Yeah. Growing up, I think I was like a lot of kids at that age. They wanted to be a baseball player, and it didn't take me long to realize I wasn't good enough. So, once I got on the football beat, I really enjoyed watching them play, talking to the players. And I've just been a football guy ever since, both pro and college. Even though the Rams left us, I still watch the NFL. I know a lot of guys didn't want to do that. A lot of season ticket holders and all that, they vowed they'd never watch the NFL again.
Right.
I think a lot of those have come back eventually. And now they root against the Rams, of course. I watch college and NFL religiously. So I'm a big football fan.
It's changed a lot with the NIL stuff and the transfer portal and everything. It's become more of a kind of a crazy game now.
Well, it is. And I think that might be one reason why some of these coaches are retiring. Nick Saban announced he did retire a couple of weeks ago. And I've noticed since then, a lot of his former players are going to the portal and they're transferring, because they don't want to play for the new coach, or they want to get an opportunity somewhere else. But
so, Dennis, what do you think about Mizzou next year, the Tigers?
Well, they're losing a couple of key players. The running back, Cody Schrader.
Right.
He was, a former walk-on, and he had 2 great seasons there. But Brady Cook is coming back, and Luther Burden's coming back, and a couple of the other receivers. I think it would be a surprise if they fell back last year and they weren't competitive like they were this year. I saw one prediction, a way too early prediction, that said the Mizzou was going to go 11-1 in the regular season, losing only to Alabama. So I don't know. That's a little early to make that kind of a statement. But I think
you're positive.
Drinkwitz is the real thing.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
I think he's finally finding his sea legs a little bit.
Yeah. It took him a while,
Well, got to develop that.
He's a good recruiter. I think he's proved that, and he's turned over some of the play calling to other coaches, so that helps a lot. I think So that was a good decision. But they were a fun team to watch again.
Yeah.
Good to get your
It's a
perspective.
great game
that.
against Ohio State.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of boring for 3 quarters or so.
Right.
But
Until it opened up.
Yeah, they eventually they won that one. But it was.
It was fun.
I think people were yawning through some of that game. I don't know about eating with their mouth open, but
He fit right in here, didn't he?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Now, let's turn the kaleidoscope here a little bit.
Okay.
And this book, The Lost Treasures of St. Louis, it's the second edition.
Correct.
And how did you get involved with this project?
Well, over the years, I had contributed some book ideas to Reedy Press. Reedy is the publisher located here in St. Louis. And they weren't the ideas that the publisher wanted to do. These were more chapter books. And Reedy does more of these coffee table books with a lot of photos and descriptions next to them, like Lost Treasures. And Cameron Collins, who wrote the first book by himself in 2017, he was kind of under a tight deadline to get this done. And he had been caring for his mom, who was ill. She eventually passed away. And he also has a full-time job. So Josh Stevens, the Reedy Press publisher, called me and asked if I'd be interested in helping out and helping Cameron complete the book. So I said, yeah. And so Cameron and I met up, and it was kind of an instant. We met instantly, and
You molded together.
molded, yeah, pretty quickly. And so he gave me some things he wanted me to write, and I just kept on doing it until they said stop.
Wow.
So in the, I guess, second edition, obviously adding new lost treasures in there along the way. Was there any modification of the old lost treasures that were in there, or any updating that was done there?
Some of the ones that were carried over to the second edition were updated if they needed to be. And Cameron wrote all these new introductions to each section that was in there. And there were about 130 new lost treasures that we put in this book that were not in the first edition.
So when, to have people understand what is a lost treasure here, we're talking about lost restaurants, lost places of food and drink establishments, entertainment establishments, retail establishments, media establishments, community kind of places. And do you have a favorite of any of those categories? I know you had mentioned to me earlier when we talked, like there's the Bayou Bell, and we're going to get into these, the Biltmore Club, Bloody Island, Wet Willie's. Remember Wet Willie's?
Oh, yeah.
And the Spirits of St. Louis.
Oh, I
you know,
know.
we're getting to basketball now.
Right.
Yeah.
So
The Floating McDonald's, one of my favorite.
Yeah. So you've mentioned many of my favorites. There are a lot of them in there that I had fun researching that I didn't know everything about, or some of them I didn't know anything about, like the Biltmore Club, which maybe we'll talk about a little later. But we tried to, there's a whole new chapter in there that was not in the first edition called Made in St. Louis. And it's about products that were made in St. Louis back in the day that people might be surprised that they were made here. Like the Corvette was made here from 1954 to 1981.
That's
before they moved to Kentucky.
Yes. Yeah. Bowling
I
Green,
remember
Kentucky.
this
I think that's
now.
when they transferred there. A lot of, everybody thinks of St. Louis and beer, and they think it's Anheuser-Busch, but there were a lot of other breweries back in the day that brewed, had factories and brewed their beer here in St. Louis, and like things like So Good potato chips and Old Judge coffee and just, several things.
7-Up.
7-Up,
Yeah.
Listerine.
Right.
Yeah.
I love the book. I
It
really
was
did.
great.
I was looking through it before the show, and it was hard to put down. It's great. How long does it take to put a book like this together? How long did you work on that?
They called me in March of last year, and Cameron had already started doing some of the legwork on it, and he gathered most of the new pictures. And that's not an easy task, because you can't just find a picture somewhere and then automatically use it. You have to get permission from whoever took it. You have to go through a lot of somersaults and flips and everything to do that. But I started in March, and we went at it pretty heavily till about the end of August. And then in September, it was a lot of proofing the pages and making corrections and all that. And it went to press, I think, in late September, and came out on around October 11th.
Wow.
Of this past year.
That's good labor of
It
love.
was a lot. It was labor intensive for about 6 months. Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Had to do it that way. We would have never met the deadline.
Right.
and Regis Philbin. I mean, just to throw something out there, I had forgotten Regis had a show here in St. Louis, from St. Louis.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of readers will feel the same way. Oh, I forgot about
Yeah.
that. Or they'll say, oh, I remember going there.
Right.
Oh, that was great when
Yeah.
It brings back
That's why it was so hard to put down.
fond memories.
Yeah.
And hopefully fond memories.
What you just described was exactly as I was going through the book,
Mhm.
my exact emotions. Oh man, I couldn't remember.
Right.
I've forgotten about that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what happens.
And then you think you know something about a thing, but then when you research it, you find out maybe you didn't know the whole story.
That's true.
Whatever.
That's true.
So,
Yeah.
You're listening to St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston. We're talking to Dennis Dillon about the second edition, The Lost Treasures of St. Louis. And Dennis, you mentioned about there was a pretty heavy schedule to get this done. So help listeners understand, you're not just working like maybe 9 to 5 on this. How many hours a day or how many hours a week? Because I want to put things in perspective for people so they understand the volume of time that goes into something like this, especially in prepping for this.
Well, it was almost a full-time job for me.
Mhm.
And fortunately, I didn't have any other things that I needed to do, so I could devote, all that time. But there were days when I spent 8, 9 hours, and, not every day, but it was pretty intensive. Worked a lot of weekends too,
Mhm.
and the research took a lot of time. And then when I felt like I had researched a person or a thing or a place enough, then I looked at all the notes that I took, and then I tried to put it into these 100 to 125 word descriptions, which wasn't always easy because you can't get everything in there,
Right.
And so you tried to get the best stuff
Yes.
in there, the best stuff that would interest readers and all that.
Now, I'm sure you probably went down to the main branch of the library here in St. Louis. You went to the Missouri Historical Society, or?
Actually, not. I did not. I did most of my research on Google, and then I'd find things that had been written in the paper
Mhm.
or in magazines like the Riverfront Times
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
something like that. I could usually do my research there.
Okay.
And I think Cameron probably used those other resources from time to time, at least for the first book. I know that. And the neat thing about Cameron is he isn't even from St. Louis. He moved here, I think, maybe 20 years ago. He's from upstate New York. And
Wow.
so when he was researching that first book, he was kind of going into it cold. He didn't have any knowledge for a lot of these things that he wrote about. But
It was a big discovery kaleidoscope for him, though.
yeah, it really was. Yeah.
Some of the things I couldn't believe this until I read it. The Joy of Cooking book.
Oh
that
my!
originated here in
Did
St.
it?
Louis.
Get out of here!
Yeah, I didn't know that.
No,
And that's the whole front end.
I didn't know that
forward
either.
is about that.
Yeah, that's the lead into the food and drink chapter in the book. But yeah, this woman, Backer, I think her name is, she was a widow and she wanted to find a way to earn some money. So she put together this raw cookbook and she went around door to door in her neighborhood selling it to her neighbors and that. And then as time went on, she'd collect more recipes, update the book. And yeah, it's amazing because she had no writing talent going into that project. I mean, it was just, she liked cooking. She liked collecting recipes.
Yeah.
And I think it was 1931 that her book first came out. But yeah, there's been a lot of new additions, since then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And moving the Capitol and the White House to St. Louis.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
And stone by stone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that went over well in Congress in D.C. I don't think anybody really was for that. Somebody had thought it would be a possibility, but can you imagine if St. Louis was the capital of the United States? I mean,
That'd be crazy.
yeah, it would be.
I think they wanted to be centrally located in the country.
Perhaps.
And I think that
would make
that's what I heard.
But,
I think there's some other things that even native St. Louisans like Mark and myself weren't aware of. Like St. Louis had a really vibrant Chinatown for a long time.
it did. I think it was called Hop Alley. It was down in the city, maybe have been on 7th Street around there.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was St. Louis's Chinatown back in the day. A lot of restaurants, of course, and other Asian type,
Mhm.
businesses in that area. Hop Alley, I'm not so sure that was the best name for it,
Right.
not politically correct.
Right.
But back then, I think those things were accepted,
Right.
Yeah.
Carry Patch for the Irish,
Mhm.
Hop Alley for the
Mhm.
Chinese, and other, other places, other areas
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
I think this is, even for people who kind of like Cameron, who aren't from St. Louis, gives a nice flavor of what St. Louis had been, even with buildings and retail establishments and restaurants and just the vibrancy of the city. I guess as let's talk a little bit about some of these favorites that you have. The Bayou Belle, which I was not familiar with, the steamboat or paddle boat.
Right. It was a 226-foot stern wheeler that was sitting in a bayou in New Orleans, and a man named Obi Koprivica. He came from a family who owned some restaurants, and he wanted to start one of his own. So he went to New Orleans on his honeymoon, and he saw this. He fell in love with the culture and the cuisine of New Orleans, and he wanted to bring some of that back to St. Louis. And he saw this big boat sitting there in the bayou in New Orleans. He came back. He and his business partner ended up buying some land on a farm in Bridgeton, Missouri. So a lot of people, if you didn't grow up in Bridgeton or lived in that area, you might not know about this. But anyway, he went back. It was being used by a Pentecostal church group, and they bought the boat for $8,000. They had it towed up the Mississippi from New Orleans. I think it took like 10 to 12 days.
Wow.
Then they went down the Missouri River to the old St. Charles Rock Road Bridge. I don't know if you
Right.
remember that one.
I do.
And they somehow got it out of the water. They put it on a house mover, and they drove it down St. Charles Rock Road to where they eventually put it in atop this concrete moat. It was on St. Charles Rock Road in McKelvey. There's a Target shopping center there in Bridgeton,
Mhm.
and it was kind of in front of that. And then it took a couple years to renovate it. And one night, he was on the top deck repainting the smokestacks. He lost his balance. He fell into this concrete
Oh,
moat, which there was no water in it yet. Suffered a massive brain injury. He died the next day.
Oh my.
So he never got to see the opening of his restaurant. His wife went ahead and with his partner opened it in 1963. And it was a steakhouse, a lot of seafood, a lot of New Orleans dishes. They had gangplanks on each end that you entered from. It was open for about 12 years. And then in 1975, I believe, there was a massive fire, and it destroyed the restaurant. Nobody was injured, which was good. But yeah, I thought the story of it, moving all the way from New Orleans, going down the river, up the river, and then being towed down St. Charles Rock Road. I would have liked to have seen that
would have
side.
been fun. Yeah.
I would have gotten stuck in traffic to see that.
Yeah. And not got mad.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's pretty cool.
and those are the kind of stories that end up getting lost unless there's something like this available
Right.
to refer back to so people can do further research. Otherwise, it's gone. I'm kind of out in that area, Holiday Hill, Natural Bridge, and out by the airport. I remember that. I could even sing the jingle for you. That's how much it,
Maybe you
reverberates
should.
in my
Maybe
head.
you should not. Don't do that.
Every day's a holiday at Holiday Hill was their little tagline.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Advertising does work.
Yeah, it does.
Wow.
Especially with music.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because every day's a holiday at Holiday Hill.
He did it. Dennis, he did it.
All right. Remembered it.
Don't encourage him, Dennis.
Well, that was one of 3 or 4 amusement parks that existed back in the day
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
St. Louis. Of course, today a lot of people only know about Six Flags,
Right.
but there was Holiday Hill which was near the airport.
Mhm.
There was Channel Rocks Amusement Park, which was in North County, off of Riverview Drive. I think it overlooked the Mississippi River and the Channel Rocks Bridge. And then, of course, there was Forest Park Highlands that eventually burned down.
Right.
But that was across from where today's Forest Park Community College is.
Yep.
So, yeah, there were a lot of great places for school picnics, family reunions, that type of thing back then.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a little brief break, and we'll come back, talk more about Bloody Island, maybe Wet Willie's.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The Biltmore Club, Spirits of St. Louis, and several other things. So we'll be right back. You're listening to St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston on the U.S. Radio Network. This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune.
St. Louis in Tune strives to bring you informative, useful, and reflective stories and interviews about current and historic issues and events that involve people, places, and things. Our topics cover a wide range, such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, health, history, housing, humor, justice, and even sports. And that's just to name a few. While St. Louis in Tune originates from the Gateway City and covers local topics, we connect to what is going on nationally as well. If you enjoy what you hear, please take time and like and share and subscribe to this show and listen to other previous shows that can be found on our website, stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com. Or on your favorite podcast platform. That's stlintune.com. stlintune.com. And if you've got an idea that you'd like for us to examine a little deeper, let us know by dropping us a note at stlintune@gmail.com. That's stlintune@gmail.com. St. Louis in Tune, heard Monday through Friday on the usradionetwork.com and many great radio stations around the U.S. and, of course, right here in St. Louis. Our website again is stlintune.com. We want to hear from you. stlintune.com.
Welcome back to St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston. We are talking about the Lost Treasures, second edition book, Lost Treasures of St. Louis with Dennis Dillon. And let's turn that kaleidoscope a little bit more. Dennis, Bloody Island.
Ooh. I know, it sounds like, wow.
Now, as we were talking off air a little bit, Bloody Island, I won't steal the thunder there.
It probably wasn't a treasure per se. I'm not sure anybody savored the memory of it, but it was an interesting place that I thought belonged in the book. It started out in the early 1800s as it wasn't really an island. It was more of a sandbar, and it kind of just kept growing. At first, it was an impediment to riverboat traffic. It was on the shore, where it's now downtown St. Louis, between that and Illinois. And over time, it got bigger. It eventually grew to a mile long and 500 feet wide.
Wow.
And cottonwood trees grew on it. And because of its neutral location under the auspices of neither Missouri or Illinois, it became a place where aristocratic men would settle their disputes by going over to Bloody Island and dueling,
Ooh.
usually with pistols.
Gotcha.
And one of the most famous duels was between Thomas Hart Benton and
Mhm.
Charles Lucas. They were on opposite sides of some kind of a land proposal deal, and they got heated and they called each other names, and they finally decided to take it to Bloody Island. And the first time, they actually dueled twice. The first time, Benton shot Lucas in the throat, but Lucas actually survived, and Benton was shot in the knee. And you think that, okay, guys, we both survived. Let's put it behind us.
Right.
No, a little later they got into another
Let's finish the
dispute.
job.
Yeah,
Finish the job.
we don't hold any grudges or anything, but let's do this again. So they went
Yeah, it
back
was
over
fun.
there, and this time Benton shot and killed Lucas.
Oh,
So that was one of the interesting things I found doing the research. Now there's not much left of what is the Bloody Island. I think it was kind of pushed over near the Illinois side of the river, and it's under one of those under one of the bridges. I don't know if it's the Poplar or one of the other ones, but back in the day, it was an interesting place for to settle disputes.
Yeah,
Wow.
no doubt. You know,
Wow.
and speaking of bridges, there was a rail car underneath the Poplar Street Bridge that was a
Restaurant.
restaurant and a music venue or something.
What?
It might have been, yeah. That one I
Yeah.
didn't, yeah. I don't have that much knowledge on that one, to tell you the truth, but yeah, that was,
It got flooded out in the flood of
was
93.
it the Palace car or what?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
While we're doing that, the Biltmore Club.
That was probably the most interesting thing I discovered while doing research for the book. The Biltmore Club was a building high on a hill that sat on the boundary, both Jefferson County and St. Louis County. Back in the days of Prohibition, it was a speakeasy, and it was a place for the high rollers, the men and women, the rich men and women in St. Louis could go there, and they could gamble and drink alcohol illegally, but they had their privacy to do it. There was one big room they had with a reinforced steel door that they could go in there and do all this illegal stuff,
Yeah.
And there were some gangster tie-ins to it. I think even Al Capone went there one time. It was kind of a shady place. And out in front of it, they had these two guard booths, and their guards in there allegedly had some kind of weapons, maybe rifles or
Machine guns.
machine guns.
Yeah, I like
And they were
machine
there
guns.
to keep out the riffraff.
Oh, yeah.
And so if the Biltmore Club was about to be raided, and say the St. Louis County police came, they'd get the word into that special room where all the people were, and they say, go stand on the Jefferson County side. And then they wouldn't have any authority, to arrest them. And then, of course, if it was Jefferson County gendarmes, they'd say, go stand on the
St.
St. Louis County side. But
Love
it went till about 1931, I think. Then it was dormant for a while. It reopened in 1951 as a supper club. It reopened later as a music venue for the younger crowd. And then it eventually was burned. I think it burned down.
Why are they always
lost
burned
before.
down? They always seem to burn down.
Insurance money.
Yeah.
Where was it located?
I think it was located off of Gravois, out near maybe where
Down
the
Gravois.
Gravois Mills
Uh-huh.
shopping center is,
Right.
maybe in that area. It was
Gotcha.
up on a hill,
Kind of like George Winter Park area.
not too far from there. Yeah.
Okay.
And but I think it was on both boundaries, kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
straddled the Jefferson County and St. Louis County boundaries.
Smart idea.
Interesting. So, the biggest surprise for you? I know that was a kind of a favorite story, but you were like, I can't believe that, or what in the world?
That's a good question, and I'm trying to think. that the Biltmore Club and Bloody Island. I had no idea about that one. I thought that was kind of interesting too. But another thing that struck out was how many restaurants and bars had to close because of the pandemic. A lot of these closed down within the last 5 years, 6 years or so.
I can notice that.
Yeah, because they had to cut their hours or maybe close during the pandemic, and then when they tried to come back, the employees didn't come back a lot of times, and they just couldn't support business, unfortunately. So a lot of them ended up on the cutting room floor, I guess.
It kind of surprises me because my wife and I were talking about this, how much institutions, and many times they don't look ahead and kind of see what the landscape's going to be. They're not trying to think like, well, how can I possibly maintain vibrancy, i.e. the pandemic? Okay, a lot of restaurants, they shuttered. And a lot of restaurants, they started making food for the workers who were in the hospital, so that there was some kind of supply and demand going on. They kept some basic employees so they could keep some core employees going. They kind of got out into other things, and many restaurants now that I'm familiar with, that like 50% of their business is carry out now, because they established this kind of, you can come carry out and go through all the regimen that we have to do. And we were talking about how education many times, over the years has had several interventions, but has never kind of tweaked from what the original kind of thing was. And there's a section on here of William Ittner schools that are all closed, because the city, the population's down, and then you look at the archdiocese, there's a section in here of the archdiocese, all those that have shuttered and closed. And it makes you wonder, when technology or things start to change, are we looking ahead a little bit more than we need to maintain our vibrancy or to maintain the business?
Well, clearly a lot of those places weren't. They didn't have long range plans to find out how they could keep business going no matter what happens. You mentioned the carryout business. I don't know if you guys know about Faraci's Pizza. It's out on Manchester Road. It's one, my wife and I, one of our favorites. Well, they went to carry out only during the pandemic, and they made more money than before, when they had both dine in and carry out. It was a very popular spot, but in a lot of those restaurants, that's how they stayed alive, was carry out. And like you said, making meals for workers and other people.
Got rid of a lot of that overhead.
Yeah.
So some of my favorite here is, I know you mentioned Wet Willie's. That's out in Fenton also.
There was one in Fenton and there's one in St. Charles.
Okay, wasn't aware of that.
I think St. Charles, it was off of I-70 near the Cave Springs exit.
Okay, yes.
They both were built about the same time in 1978. And they were fun, a fun water slide to go down to. They had twists and turns. You rode these 2 foot by 4 foot rubber mats, and you'd slide and end up going into a little pool where you'd exit. The problem was they were not made out of fiberglass like today's water slides are. They were concrete.
Ooh.
So if you lost your mat,
Wow.
you would be thrust around in that water, and you'd go up against these concrete walls. You could end up with bruises or cuts or sometimes broken bones. And a lot of times, I know when St. Charles's West Willie's first started, within the first month, they had to take 10 people. 10 people had to go to the hospital because of injuries. One of them with a broken vertebrae.
Oh my.
So, and then adding insult to injury, sometimes if you lost your mat, not only did you get cut up and bumped and everything, you might lose your swimming suit too.
Ooh.
That might not be the best thing when he ended up in the pool there.
Yeah.
Half your suit is
Still stuck up
100
there.
feet up.
Zoom.
Wow. Okay.
Some of these places in the book here, like I'm looking at the Plantation Club, was located in
Forgot
the
about
Palladium.
Yeah.
And I went I would go and I'd look up on Google Maps. That building's still standing. It's all boarded up.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like, we have such wonderful things, or like you were saying, though, Mark, it burned down,
Yeah.
or it burned down, or it was knocked down. Now it's a
Right,
parking lot.
right.
You know, yeah, knocked down. Now it's a parking lot.
Right.
And that you can't keep everything.
No.
But we have a tendency to, as I guess cities develop, we need more parking, and so let's knock this old building down because it's, what's it worth?
Forget the historical.
But this is it's a very historical building.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was a place where a lot of black entertainers performed there, and it was mostly a white audience. I think there were some gangster ties to that one also, or a mob tie, but they didn't serve alcohol there. They served setups, with water, soda, and all that. So patrons could come in and bring their own liquor with them, and then it would be able to stay open past the 1 a.m. Curfew because it technically didn't serve alcohol. But that was, they compared that to the Cotton Club in New York,
right?
Which I don't know much about, but I've heard.
Yeah. So we had like Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald, the Mills Brothers, Billie Holiday perform there. That's crazy.
Yeah. Can you imagine going there in St. Louis and seeing those hit musicians back in the day?
Oh yeah.
And there's another one at Natural Bridge, and let's say Martin Luther King, Natural Bridge, and I'm going to get my there's the Cherokee Cave and Museum. That was another cool place.
You know what I missed in the book? It was Fitz's. I don't know if you remember Fitz's.
Fitz's Root Beer?
Yeah. Well, they had a spot on Clayton Road in Brentwood. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Really?
We used to go there all the time. Best hamburgers in the world. Fitz's sauce was on it.
I think there's a Fitz's still open on Delmar, maybe in the
Yeah.
Loop.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
They I think they finally moved there, but it was a dive place. It was barely standing.
Oh, really?
It should have burned
The
down.
grease was holding it up.
But,
How about 905 beer?
Oh, my gosh.
905 liquor stores.
Yep.
Remember those?
I do. Tomboy.
Yes.
Tomboy.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Now, let me ask you this.
Oh, the Eagle. What were the
Eagle
Eagle
stamps.
stamps,
Yeah.
S&H stamps.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom used to make me lick the backs and stick them in the book.
Had those books. Yeah.
Get the kid to do it. That's
Sticky tongue by the end of that.
What, in your opinion, happened to Gaslight Square?
That's a good question because I never went there. Our family moved here in 1963, and I was only 14 years old. The only time I got down to downtown in that time was like to go to a ball game or something like that. But I don't know what caused the closure of it, to tell you the truth. Maybe some of the places started going out of business, and then they just kind of eventually all folded. I don't know. I know it was a hopping place for a long time.
Yes.
It was just west of downtown.
Right.
And I never went there myself, as I mentioned, but I heard it was a great, bars, restaurants, a lot of entertainment district.
I guess it was almost kind of like the Grove, Central West End, and a couple other places that Luke put together.
When I was a kid,
Yeah,
when I was 16, we used to drive down there just to see the old boarded up buildings. It was still even
I
kind
think it was on DeBoliver or near
Yeah,
DeBoliver.
Olive, I heard there
Yeah.
was like maybe a murder down there or something. Somebody got shot, and so it's like, okay, we're not going to do that.
that would do it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Imagine that, murder in St. Louis.
No, I can't imagine. I know.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah. Right.
Unbelievable kinds of stuff here, Dennis. It's really good stuff, and really highly encourage people to take a look at this. It's entitled. It's the second edition, folks. So it's the a wonderful book by Reedy Press. You can get it at reedypress.com. The Lost Treasures of St. Louis. And if you're from St. Louis, you'll probably do what Mark and I did. Like, oh man, Ready Whip. Wow.
Yeah.
Ready Whip was made here in St. Louis.
Mr. Softy. You had a picture of a Mr. Softy truck. We used to run after those trucks all the time. That was good stuff.
Venture stores.
Yeah.
Oh,
Grandpa Pigeons.
Owned by Famous Bar.
Yeah.
Venture stores.
Schweig Engel stores. Remember those commercials?
Yeah.
Schweig Engel.
I
That's
had
the Queen of Carpet.
Yeah.
Carpet and tile.
Yeah, she just passed
She
away.
just passed away, right?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
crazy kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah. It's a fantastic book. Highly recommend this book.
You mentioned the lost parishes, and do I have time to tell a little
Sure.
bit
Oh,
about that?
absolutely.
That was Cameron's idea. The St. Louis Archdiocese announced during the summer last year that it was going to close 35 Catholic churches and merge 15 others. And this was getting toward the end of our deadline. But Cameron thought this would be a great addition to the book. So he took 2 days and drove all over St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and surrounding counties and took a picture of each and every one of those churches that was going to be affected by this. So all 50 churches are in there.
Oh wow.
And
yeah.
at one point,
Uh-huh.
one time, the first day, he put 600 miles on his car and he forgot to eat. And I think he forgot to drink water. He became dehydrated.
Oh my gosh.
And at one point, he was in Tiff, Missouri, TIFF. I think it's a little town in Washington County. And he had lost his cell service. And he found himself driving down this gravel road, and it ended at the bottom of it. So he went to turn around in someone's driveway, and the guy came out, the owner came out, cussing and yelling at him and coming at him like, "Where do you think you're doing?" All that. And eventually Cameron said something back to him, and the guy backed off, but all Cameron was trying to do was turn around. I guess this guy didn't get any visitors, and he was fortunately he wasn't with a gun. He didn't have a gun in his hand.
No kidding.
Yeah, but Cameron, that was his baby. He did all that in 2 days.
Wow. Lost Treasures of St. Louis, second edition. Dennis, thanks for coming on St. Louis in Tune.
Thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
Great book. Highly recommend.
Yes.
Book. Yeah. And you can get it in stores too, I guess.
Oh, you can get it Barnes and Noble,
Okay.
independent bookstores, Amazon, sell it. And Cameron and I both will provide you books directly if you want.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
Signed.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Signed copies. Okay. Wonderful.
Mark, we've had now this is not to put don't be scared about this. Now, what I'm going to say, it's been an unfortunate thing that a couple people who we've interviewed have passed away.
Uh-oh.
And so he's choking over here. But Richard Rosenfeld from University of Missouri St. Louis, he passed away recently. And he was the distinguished professor emeritus at UMSL, specialized in social sources of crime. We've had him on, I know, at least 2 times.
Right.
And talking about some of his crime stats and things like that. And then you may remember this. This is going back a ways, Mark. Todd Matthews from the Doe Network, the missing kids. We did a show. There was a girl who she had her arms and her legs are horrific, and she was beheaded.
I do remember.
Her torso was left in North St. Louis, and there was a movie that a local movie person was doing. They did on that, but then we had Todd on because he talked about the Doe Network, and the Doe Network is trying to link up missing people, and then what they're doing right now is they're getting this DNA. And somebody said, and they have DNA and it's matching together, but there's only like 12 states that are quote unquote required to submit information to the Doe Network, and Missouri's not one of them. And so I get some of their information on social media, and they've had some discoveries because of people are doing all this ancestry research, and they're doing the DNA stuff, and so they're matching up things many 40 years later. But Todd passed away recently from an illness, so I wanted to recognize those, and those would be some really good interviews, folks, if you want to go back and listen to those. Not because I said they're good or Mark said they're good, but they're very interesting on the topics that we had. And speaking of which, we have a new website. It's still stlintune.com, but you can go in and go by season now and find out from season. You can go into different categories like art and architecture or crime or education or history or justice or music or society and culture. There's a whole group of things there. And it just provides a little bit more information for you as a listener and wanting to get a little bit more information, you can do search like the old other one, but this one's a little more user friendly, and I recommend that. Matter of fact, we're going to have a section in there on guests also. And Dennis is he's actually the first guest who's going to have a guest page, and he's going to be linked to this particular podcast.
Wow.
So we do the show on the radio, and then we put it on for the podcast. And we have such a large group of people that are actually working for us. It's, Mark's basically doing all of the recording right now, and I do all the other stuff. So it's, that's our, we have a great large group of people doing this. So.
And we're getting a good library of YouTube videos of all of these now.
Yes.
And they're, we have I guess you call it, what do you call it? A playlist or whatever.
Right.
Of just St. Louis in Tune.
Right.
And
matter of fact, all of the audio Google podcasts is going away if they're not gone. And they're moving because Google owns YouTube. So all of the episodes that have been on Google Podcasts have migrated now to YouTube. And something that we're, I'm going to surprise Mark here, wanting to get into maybe doing some video, but it takes a little bit of time. It takes, getting into the right kind of plan, getting the right equipment to do that, and making sure that it works out. I don't want to do something that looks, halfway done.
No.
Half baked.
Yeah.
Half baked cookies are okay, but not half baked radio shows.
Right. Is that how it goes?
All right. So, Mark, what do you have? You have any days of the day today?
There's a couple of interesting ones. It's National Pie Day. Did you know that, Dennis?
Ooh.
I did not.
Do you have a
but
favorite
thank you for
pie?
informing me.
I'm wondering if you have a favorite pie.
Ooh, yeah.
Anybody have a favorite pie?
Yeah, I love peach pie.
My wife was going to make me a peach pie here.
Peach pie.
Yeah. Peach cobbler. International Sticky Toffee Pudding Day.
Ooh.
I don't know who comes up with these. This is one that I think is just right on the money. Measure Your Feet Day. Get out a ruler and find out if you're really wearing the right size shoes. So it's National King Day. This is your day. King Day. We honor you today if you're a king, whether you are a royalty, by name or simply as a royal person.
That's always the day in England.
Is it? Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, right.
Every day is King Day.
I know. They're trying to do that here, though. Okay. National Report Pharmaceutical Fraud Day. Spread the word about this day to help save the Medicare program. I guess it's for the Medicare program.
That makes sense.
Who votes on these days? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Make them up.
Here's a good one. National Rhubarb Pie Day. Do you like rhubarb? No,
actually,
Dennis is going.
I tell you what, my mom
tart.
bought some Mrs. Smith's one time rhubarb pie. I thought this is disgusting, but my wife made some rhubarb pie, and it's actually, when it's made correctly, it's really good.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh my. Okay. Well, let's see. Snowplow Mailbox Hockey Day. Mount your trucks with the best plow blade as we celebrate mailbox thrashing.
So you knock them down?
Yeah, heck yeah, with the snowplow. Or what happened the other day yesterday, I guess it was, with a
fire truck.
Fire truck.
Yeah, down
knock
in
them out with a fire truck.
Community, right?
Yeah, that's the other way to do that.
It was a nice parking job, 360 parking job.
I know.
Hit a car or two along the way, no big deal.
I know. National Compliment Day is coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, nice to compliment people.
It is.
Do we do that enough?
We don't.
No. National Peanut Butter Day. That's I don't know. This is my favorite. I think it's Dennis's favorite. National Belly Laugh Day.
You should have at least one good belly laugh.
That's correct.
Isn't that
That's
right?
Correct.
I know. Let's see. International Mobile Phone Recycling Day. I could use that. Could you use that?
Maybe.
Be honest now. How many I've got? I've saved all these old phones. My wife was getting on me the other day. She's on this kick about like cleaning everything.
Oh, I've got a joke about that.
Well, it's funny because we go, I don't want to get rid of those pictures. And instead of taking them off the phone, I just put the phone on the shelf and hope that I can charge it later.
If you can find a charger.
I know, that's the other thing. I know. Yeah. You do have a joke about that?
Yeah, it's in here somewhere. But knowing your wife is in the wrong is one thing, but proving she's in the wrong is just plain stupidity.
Oh my God. That's terrible.
Just so you know, it doesn't matter how good a parent you are, you will at least once carry a screaming demon child from a public place.
It's true. I get that. I understand that.
Totally. Back in my day, I could walk in a store with $25 and walk out with 6 porterhouse steaks, 2 chickens, a case of beer, 5 bottles of wine, 2 loaves of bread, and a gallon of milk. But I can't do that today. Too many cameras. Let's see here. I forgot the word of the day, but we'll do that next time. I hate it when TV shows say they contain adult situations, but then don't show anyone going to work, paying their bills, or cleaning up after their kids.
That's it. That's true.
Let's see. I'll skip that one. Every marriage has one person who throws things out and a garbage-loving chaos goblin who says, "But I was saving that."
Yeah, that's me. I have hoarding in my blood.
My job has this cool thing where if you do your job very well, you get to do other people's jobs too. I'm broke, but I'm not like poor broke. I'm classy kind of broke. I'm baroque.
Thank you very much. Wow.
Bartender asked, "Hey, why the long face? Are you depressed?" "Because it's Horse." Walked into the bar. Horse ponders for a second, scratches his chin, and says, "I don't think I am," and promptly disappears. You see, this is a joke about Rene Descartes' famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," and could have mentioned this at the start of the joke, but that would be putting Descartes before the horse.
Stop it. Stop. It's a foul.
I always double check that our garage door is closed at night. I don't want someone stealing all the stuff we've been trying to get rid of for years. Doctor talking to a patient. "You have high blood pressure and short-term memory loss." Patient. "Well, at least I don't have high blood pressure." Here's a sign. "Buy 1 burger for the price of 2 and receive a second burger absolutely free."
What a deal.
I know it.
If cats could text you back, they would not.
Dennis is not coming back ever. He doesn't whatever. Third edition, he won't be back.
Talking to our teen daughter, I said, "Do you want to watch the baseball game with me?" She said, "No, I don't like baseball." I said, "I didn't like Little Mermaid either, but I watched it 1,387 times. Now go get your hat and jersey on."
Yeah. Okay.
The policeman pulled me over and said, "Get out of the car." Said, "Turn around." I said, "Every now and then I get a little bit lonely and you're never coming round." He goes, "Turn around." I said, "Every now and then I got tased."
He's singing again.
Hey, folks, never let an angry mom brush your hair.
That's for sure.
Some of you should walk a mile in my shoes because then you would be a mile away from me, and that would be fantastic. Just keep the shoes.
Oh, man. Really? I know. I'm looking for the drums. I can't find them.
2 reasons I don't trust people. I don't know them, and I know them.
Where did it go?
I hate people who can't let go of the past. Debt collectors are the worst.
Oh, yeah. They're absolutely the worst.
Oh, well, folks.
Yeah.
That's all for this hour. I want to thank you to Bob Berthasell for our theme music, co-host Mark Langston, and we thank you for being a part of our community of curious minds. St. Louis in Tune is a production of the Motif Media Group and the U.S. Radio Network. Remember to keep seeking, keep learning, walk worthy, and let your light shine. For St. Louis in Tune, I'm Arnold Stricker.
absolutely. It is truly timeless, of its time, and yet very timeless, very future-oriented, very modern, minimalist and sculptural, and amazing design and structural engineering. So truly a marvel. And what made you want to write a book about this? Well, I've growing up here in St. Louis, I've long admired it. I've also taught a class at Washington University on mid-century modern architecture, and we would take our students out of the classroom and to various iconic mid-century structures. And the very first class we would go would be to the Arch.
Right. Now, you're an architect by trade.
Yes, I am. Yes.
You know, I was trying to think, this is going to sound silly, but I thought, what is an architect really? Because to me, it's sort of a cross between science and art. So can you explain it to me?
Well, architecture is the art of science, and
then I was right.
You're right. You're right. Yes, of art and design and science, and so it combines both halves of the brain, and so it's a wonderful profession. It's one that allows you to expand your imagination, think about what is and what could be, ask why and why not, and how you might be able to improve our world somehow.
So in your career, have you designed buildings and things like that?
I have. My largest building to date that I had the privilege of designing was the Chaffetz Arena for St. Louis University.
You're kidding.
10,600 seats. The very green building that I had the privilege of designing, the Alberici headquarters at Page and 170. And a notable one that's in my heart is the South Entrance Plaza to the St. Louis Zoo, with the plaza and the train tunnel and the waterfall. So it's wonderful to see that and see families taking photographs of their memories there.
I wonder if I can afford to have you design a house for me.
It would be fun. Let's talk.
We'll talk after this. John, the name of your book is The Gateway Arch, an Illustrated Timeline. And what you're really looking at, I think, is what led up to the arch, not just when they broke ground for it, but the things that happened in history over there, I guess, ever since humankind landed or lived in St. Louis.
Yes, it is 90 historic events that led to the creation of the Gateway Arch. We do begin in 1699 with the Louisiana Territory and then move on to the Louisiana Purchase. When one thinks about the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial and what the memorial was intended to honor, we think about the expansion of our country, the doubling of its size with the Louisiana Purchase, and so on. But to be sure, when the European settlers came through and came down the river, we were known as the Mound City because of the Mississippian culture that had been here long before us.
The mounds, of which there are, I guess, one or two left, right?
Yeah, well, most of them have. There is one or two left, and the great mounds over in Cahokia are really to be seen and taken in. Yes.
Well, let's look at a couple of images from your book and get things going. And it's filled with fabulous pictures and images.
Yes.
And I've seen this one before, one similar to it. I can never get this one out of my mind.
Yes. Here we are at the top of the arch, and it's been completed here. And you can see the workmen. The crane is still in the background there, so it's still up there waiting to climb back down again. It was a creeper derrick, and it was used. It rose up with each section to hoist each can into the place. But at any rate, they are polishing and cleaning the stainless steel outer surface on their way back down.
Did they get paid extra?
Not that I know of, but
I just have a widow's walk on the top of my third floor, and I can't stand on that without my knees getting weak and queasy. I can't imagine what it would be like to stand on top of the arch
and without being tied off. That is truly remarkable. In fact, they didn't want to be tied off. It was pre-OSHA, so they weren't required, but they didn't want to because it would be more cumbersome. But truly very courageous and very talented and skillful workers. And it should be noted, while the insurance actuarials thought they might lose 13 or so men in the construction, no one died.
Wow. There was that time, remember when the guy threw his plane through?
Yes.
Threw the plane through and got in trouble?
Yes.
That's not in the book, though.
No, not in the book.
Let's look at another image here. What's this?
So this is the historic riverfront, obviously pre-arch grounds, and this is...
It was pretty kind of an industrial warehouse area, right?
It was, and it really was the economic engine of St. Louis, and you can see the riverboats on the landing, but here you have about 37 blocks of what would become the Gateway Arch, and every building, it's party wall to party wall. So I wrote the introduction to the Lost St. Louis Riverfront by Tom Grady, And in it, I refer to it as form follows lot. So if they had a building width that could be a certain dimension, they built side to side and as tall as they could. But what they did was they left the front side, the street side, as open as possible, and the alley side for the receiving of goods, fresh air and ventilation, and so on. And actually, there was a quite sophisticated architecture that developed on our riverfront with cast iron fronts that are the precursors to this Chicago-style high-rises.
And there was a lot of controversy, wasn't there, about demolishing that area? I mean, that
Yes.
was not an easy sell.
It was not an easy sell. There was a vote by the public to go forward, but also a lot of landowners were protesting and really did not want to see their properties sold and torn down for the development. So
Let's look at another image from the book.
yes, the Eads Bridge.
You mentioned the Eads Bridge in there, and there's even a photograph of the Eads Bridge with the arch, and you make some kind of connection, even though they're far apart in history. They're both significant.
1874, and every bit as dramatic of a structural marvel as the Gateway
We
Arch.
don't think of it now, but then it was.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to think that they were making this large clear span across the Mississippi, and you might even think of this as the first gateway to the West, physically and literally, because the trains prior to this would be dismantled, put on barges, shipped across the river, and then reassembled to go further west. So now trains could go from the east to the west with this construction, but truly an engineering marvel.
Let's look at the next one.
The topping out of the Gateway Arch.
See, I remember that because we were living in New Jersey at the time, and I remember leaving in the summer of 1965. There was a little more opening than this, but I remember driving through downtown on our trip home. I'll never get that image out of my mind.
Right. Yeah, so this was October 28th of 1965 when the last piece was set. And they began the lift in the morning, and it was set in place just a little after 11 in the morning. And the legs, as you can imagine, the forces, the pressure leaning inward, there was just about a 2-foot wide gap for an 8-foot wide section of the final section. So they had jacks that pushed the legs apart to 8.5 feet wide, set that 8-foot section in, and then they released the jacks and it was locked into place. But there was 1/64th of an inch tolerance to get this all to work out. So.
John, you say something in your book about architecture reflecting society's values and things. What do you mean by that?
Well, it represents our hopes and aspirations. It represents the times we live in. And as we say, this is a very timeless piece of architecture, but it's certainly of its time. And even when you think about, would they ever tear the riverfront down as we know it, as it existed, if that were our decision today? Probably not. We value our historic architecture more these days. But that being said, that decision was made, and thank goodness we received this wonderful design by Eero Saarinen.
And all kind of, wasn't in the 1930s the idea first started floating around?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, were there people, the arch looked so modern, were there a lot of people that thought it was too modern for an old city? It wouldn't look right?
I don't believe so. And what's interesting is the span of time it took. So the idea began in 1933 with Luther Eli Smith, an attorney and a civic booster and leader.
But they weren't thinking the arch.
No,
What were
had
they
no
thinking?
idea about the arch at the time. He was just a memorial to honor Thomas Jefferson and those who went forth from here out to the west. And so that was the idea. And it wasn't until 1947 that the competition happened. So there was quite a bit of a span of 14 years or so in between. And I will go back to the removal of those historic buildings on the riverfront. It's one thing to tear those down if you know you're going to get something as beautiful as the Gateway Arch, but nobody knew what they were going to get when they tore those buildings down, and the competition requirements were still being formulated. Yeah.
Let's look at another image from the book. That's the man himself.
There he is, Eero Saarinen, and here is a model of the Gateway Arch and the riverfront as designed. Ultimately, this is the final version, and you can see it's up further away from the river, from the levee, with the grand stairs leading down and the beautiful landscape by Dan Colley surrounding it. What's interesting about this is that, well, first of all, Eero Saarinen designed, he trusted his eye, and he had models made of everything. And even if there were mathematical formulas that he was thinking about and analyzing, he didn't trust it until he saw it physically. And so this is a 630 foot tall by 630 foot wide, flattened catenary arch. He actually pushed down on it to give it a more rounded top. Mm-hmm. But what's fascinating about this photograph in particular, you see in front of Eero Saarinen, there are 3 vertical slabs of buildings just in front of him. That is the Mansion House. And what's interesting when we talk about architecture and society and how it reflects society and how architecture interacts with the built environment, the design for the Mansion House originally was 2 40-story towers. And that caught everybody's attention, Eero Saarinen, the city, and they felt that was going to compete with the arch too much. And therefore, the city came back and said, we need to limit to the new buildings to 27 stories. So that's why we have 3 towers at Mansion House at 27 and instead of 2 40-story towers. And also, Eero Saarinen said, I'm going to take the arch from 590 to 630 feet. So each of those 2 buildings influenced each other.
Fascinating. We're going to take a little break now, John, but we come back. We're going to talk more about the Gateway Arch and Illustrated Timeline. Stay with us.
This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. John C. Gunther is our guest. He has a new book out, The Gateway Arch, an Illustrated Timeline. And John, just to kind of recap, it's not just about the arch itself. It's about everything in the decades, in the centuries that led up to the arch.
Right. It's, the Gateway Arch is such an iconic structure. And when you see it, you instinctively know it's a gateway structure.
In your book, you use the term connecting the dots. What do you mean by that?
Right. So I think it's really important. It's fascinating how history and the various events interconnect with one another. And so you go from one event to another, and had this event not happened, something entirely different might have happened. So it's fascinating to trace that line. But also you might think of the book as the historic foundations of the Gateway Arch as opposed to the structural foundations. And so as such, it allows one to gain a much deeper appreciation. We're all in awe of this structure. People are drawn up there. They want to touch it and, those precise corners and everything. But then when you realize all the thought that went into it, the history that it represents, the importance of St. Louis, the centrality of St. Louis, not only physically, but in our history of our nation, it all comes through with this book. And you can go to any date and begin to connect those dots.
Let's look at another image from the book.
Yes, this is a magnificent rendering by J. Henderson Barr. He produced so many renderings, one after another, to study the building design of this. It's glimmering in the sunlight. You'll note it's a triangular cross section. This was an idea that evolved later, and it's rising up out of the landscape.
And one point I want to make too, when I'm looking at this, comment on it. We think of it now. There's the museum. There are those beautiful grounds. Back in the beginning, it was sort of just the arch, and it really has been a long time for the rest of it to develop.
Absolutely. It wasn't until 1980 that the landscape was actually fully realized, and that's well after the topping out of 1965. I might point out also in this rendering, you can see buildings in the foreground. There's an idea for a museum here of American architecture, because they realized there was a lot of great architecture that was being removed. So the idea was to have some of the finest pieces or fragments of that architecture be exhibited here. I also would point out the landscape design, which was done by a very wonderful and talented landscape architect, Dan Kiley. And I had the great privilege of meeting Dan in the 90s when he came through St. Louis to see the arch grounds once more. And I'll never forget what he told me when he went to Eero Saarinen's office one morning when they were working on the Gateway Arch competition. And Eero said to him and the team, "We are not leaving today until we've accomplished something of great significance." And Dan said, "We knew we were in for an all-nighter." So,
Speaking of landscaping, tell me if I'm making this up. Seems to me I remember a long time ago, didn't they plant a bunch of trees there in the beginning? They ended up taking down decades later because of a problem.
right. Yes, I believe there was a sort of a disease that went through those trees. And so at any rate, Dan had specified a different type of tree than what was actually installed. But
Let's look at another image.
yeah, so this is the original. The design competition was done in two parts. So this was the first submission. And the important thing to note here is while you see a gateway arch, you see that it's actually a rectangular cross-section for the leg. It's not the triangular cross-section that we know. Also take note at how close it is to the riverfront. It's virtually on the levee. But one of the things that this did not take into account, and which they were not instructed to take into account, was the railroad, the trestle.
Mm-hmm.
And that trestle came back to impact the location of the gateway arch. And it's a good thing that it moved further uphill because of our flooding conditions. There was also to be a museum, and this museum is illustrated in these various vignettes just behind the arch. It was set into the hillside.
John, I want to mention that you are president of the St. Louis chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, it's a group dedicated to celebrating and spreading the good word of the great architecture that we have here in St. Louis. So we have annual lecture series. We have 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall. We have our annual meetings as well. And but basically we are here to provide information about St. Louis architectural history.
And you also wrote something about like the 25 buildings to see in Missouri for USA Today?
Yes. I began with Missouri Life magazine, where I wrote about 50 buildings, and then USA Today Online asked if we would take it to 25 and place that online with the American Institute of Architects. And so I had to, edit even further. But Missouri is blessed with so much great architecture that this spans from north, south, east, west. So great architecture.
And nobody tops St. Louis as far as bricks.
No,
right?
No, the hub of brick architecture.
Right.
Yes.
Let's go to the next image.
This is a great diagram. This is of the tram system, and it was designed by Dick Bowser in 1960. He was referred to the Saarinen office. He and his father had an elevator company, the Bowser parking system. They would put cars on elevators and lift them up and then put them onto very elevated parking structures. And so when he was asked, could he design an elevator that didn't have to go straight up? He said, well, I think so. And so he actually had a whole 2 weeks to design the tram system. And he did it day and night working out of his house. And he was given the criteria, how many passengers per hour, per day, and so on and so forth. And he came up with the idea of these tram capsules. And they are a combination of both an elevator and a Ferris wheel. So they are hung from the supporting system, and they are pulled up, and it's a 155-degree turn as you go up the leg. And when you feel the cab sort of right itself, that's the Ferris wheel principle.
My favorite thing is to take somebody that's never been up to the arch, because you know the expression on their faces when they get in there.
Yeah. Very tight.
Yeah, it's quite an experience. Let's look at another one.
So here is a photograph of Eero Saarinen, and I referred to him trusting his eye and making models. And he would make he and his office would make very large scale models, so he could literally be inside the
And it
model.
wasn't always like this. Didn't it vary a little at first? It was not quite as rounded or something.
Right. So what you're looking at here is the later versions, and you see the triangular cross section. Early on, it was about 590 feet high and about 700 feet wide, so decidedly wider and shorter. And over time, it became more of a 590 by 591, and then 630 by 630 in terms of height and width. But the big contribution, and this is one of these moments in history that really changes history, Eero Saarinen was at Cranbrook Academy, where he and his father Elio, they were based, and Carl Milles was a Swedish sculptor in residence. Carl Milles passed by Eero's desk, saw the design with the rectangular cross section for the legs, and said, "Eero, that should be a triangle, not a rectangle."
Huh.
And Eero thought about it and accepted Carl Milles' idea, and that was put into the second stage competition. But it's amazing and wonderful that Carl Milles saw that, made that recommendation. Unfortunately, he did not get the credit he deserved.
There's one question that's always been in my mind, and you're an architect, so I have to ask you. I can't think of anything that was ever built that lasted forever except the pyramids. So ever since I was a little kid, I was wondering, the arch can't last forever.
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
Well, I mean, Eero designed for the ages and said it's for 1,000 years and beyond. It's made out of stainless steel, the outer skin, and the inner. It's a double skin.
But there must be a science to it that it's able to move, because if it wasn't flexible, it wouldn't last.
Right. It's an orthotropic design. It's a double skin. There's a stainless steel on the outside, carbon steel in the middle, in the inside, and then concrete and reinforcing. That comprises the double skin for the first 300 feet, and then the second, the remaining height up to 630 is a hollow double skin, and it was all calculated out, and it does have a little sway, a little give, as you would imagine, because you have wind forces, and I've been told, I think in 90 miles an hour it will sway up to 18 inches.
So are you telling me it will last forever?
That's what I believe. I believe it is of the ages and for the ages. I will say also, in terms of swaying, again, going back to those courageous workmen, I've heard stories from them that said they were caught up there in a quick storm, and before the pieces were connected, the legs were connected, and they said they were swaying quite violently. So
wow. Let's look at some more images from the book, The Gateway Arch, an illustrated timeline.
Yes. So this shows you the land as it was around 1945, with 37 blocks cleared of over 400 buildings, and with the old courthouse, the old cathedral, and the old rock house, the three historic structures remaining. And notably, you see the trellis, the elevated train tracks going alongside the levee. And that was one of those key elements that had to be relocated prior to the arch even beginning. That was actually the first phase of the arch, was to relocate those tracks.
Do you think St. Louis would be different today if the arch had never happened?
Well, I mean, yes, probably so. Probably so. You can look at it in different ways. I mean, I think it would, the historic riverfront would have been reused and renovated, and probably been quite dynamic space with new uses. So we know Laclede's Landing and how popular that was at its time, and that's a remnant of what we could have seen had it remained. That said, this is such an iconic structure and design, and it attracts millions of visitors each year. So for the positive, I'm delighted that we have this magnificent
You're doing
arch.
about 1 million book signings over the next few months. What kind of, I'm just wondering what people say to you.
Well, it's fascinating because you do hear stories of their remembrances of the arch and when they were growing up and so on. At the Arch store, at the Arch Museum there, I met a gentleman who said he actually physically walked up the leg of the arch.
I always wanted to do that.
And I was amazed to hear that. I was surprised.
Do they let people do that?
They don't.